Welcome back to the light. Today we're journeying into the heart of the Antarctic, into a true story of survival that seems almost too incredible to be real. This is the tale of Sir Ernest Shackleton and his Imperial Transantarctic expedition. A mission that turned from a glorious quest into a desperate fight for life itself. 1914, while the world teeters on the brink of war, Shackleton and his crew of 27 men set sail aboard the ship Endurance. Their goal? To be the first to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. It was the last great prize of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, a monumental challenge that promised fame and glory. Spirits were high. The men were the best of the best, handpicked by Shackleton for their skills, and more importantly, their character. The Endurance itself was a marvel, a three-masted wooden vessel built specifically to withstand the crushing pressure of polar ice. They believed they were prepared for anything, but the Antarctic had other plans. As they neared the continent, the ice began to close in sooner and thicker than anyone expected. The ship, once a powerful vessel carving through the sea, became a tiny toy trapped in a vast, frozen maze. Day by day, the grip of the pack ice tightened. The familiar creaks of the wooden hull turned into groans of protest as immense pressure squeezed it from all sides. For 10 long months, the Endurance and its crew were prisoners of the ice, drifting helplessly with the frozen sea. They were a tiny isolated community in a world of white silence, hundreds of miles from the nearest human being. The dream of crossing the continent was gone, replaced by a single, terrifying question: would they ever see home again? The men tried to maintain a routine. They exercised the dogs on the ice, hunted for seals and penguins to supplement their rations, and maintained the ship. Shackleton, ever the leader, knew that keeping morale high was as critical as keeping their bodies warm. He organized games, sing-alongs, and even scientific observations to keep their minds occupied. He moved the crew from their cramped quarters into the more spacious hold, dubbing it the Ritz to inject a bit of humor into their dire situation. But beneath the forced cheerfulness, the relentless pressure on the ship was a constant, ominous reminder of their fragility. The sounds of the ice were terrifying sharp cracks like rifle shots and deep grinding roars as giant floes collided. Then, on October 27, 1915, the inevitable happened. The ship's timbers, which had resisted for so long, finally began to splinter, the sound like the breaking of gigantic carrots. As one man described it, the stern post was torn away. The Endurance was being crushed. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. It was a heart-wrenching moment. The ship had been their home, their shelter, their last link to the civilized world. Now, they were truly stranded, setting up a makeshift camp on a massive, unstable slab of floating ice. They named it Ocean Camp. All they had were 3 small lifeboats salvaged from the wreck, their sleds, and the dwindling supplies they could carry. The Endurance lingered for a few more weeks, a mangled skeleton held up by the ice. Before finally, in late November, it slipped beneath the surface forever. Frank Hurley, the expedition photographer, captured the haunting final moments. Shackleton wrote in his diary, "She's gone, you're alone." Now their world was a floating piece of ice, a temporary raft in a hostile ocean. They drifted for another 5 months, their new home slowly breaking apart beneath them.
Ow.
Life was a monotonous cycle of hunger, cold, and uncertainty. The sun disappeared for the long polar night, plunging them into constant darkness and even more extreme temperatures. Food was scarce. They had to sacrifice their beloved sled dogs, a painful decision that weighed heavily on every man. Through it all, Shackleton's leadership was unwavering. He treated every man with fairness, settled disputes, and shared the same hardships, never losing his optimism, at least not in front of his crew. He understood that any crack in their unity would be fatal. He was the glue holding their fragile society together. As the Antarctic summer of 1916 approached, the ice floe they called Patience Camp finally broke up, plunging them into the treacherous, ice-choked waters of the Weddell Sea. Their only hope was to reach land. For 5 agonizing days, they battled the freezing waves in their 3 small lifeboats. The James cared. The asterisk Dudley Docker asterisk, and the asterisk Stankham Wills asterisk. Soaked to the bone, frostbitten, and exhausted, they were pursued by killer whales and navigated through a labyrinth of shifting ice. Finally, against all odds, they spotted land. It was Elephant Island, a desolate storm-battered rock on the very edge of the Antarctic peninsula. It was the first time they had stood on solid ground in 497 days. But Elephant Island was no paradise. It was a barren outpost of rock and ice, far from any shipping lanes. No one was coming to rescue them because no one in the world even knew they were alive, as they were safe from the sea, but they would surely perish from starvation and exposure if they stayed. Shackleton made a decision that sounds like pure madness. He would take the strongest of the lifeboats, the 22-foot asterisk James Caird asterisk, and attempt an 800-mile open boat journey across the most ferocious stretch of ocean on the planet. Drake passes to the whaling stations of South Georgia. It was a desperate, near impossible gamble. 5 men would go with him, while the other 22, under the command of Frank Wild, would remain on Elephant Island, praying for their return. The journey of the asterisk James Caird asterisk is a legend in its own right. For 16 days, Shackleton and his 5 companions battled hurricane-force winds and monstrous waves, some so large they called them graybeards. Their tiny boat was constantly coated in a thick layer of ice that threatened to capsize them. They were perpetually wet, frozen, and suffering from thirst, as their freshwater supply was contaminated, navigating with only a sextant and chronometer, in conditions where the sun was rarely visible. Their navigator, Frank Worsley, performed miracles of seamanship. They were pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance. One man, looking back, simply said, "It was a living hell." Miraculously, they made it. They landed on the uninhabited southern coast of South Georgia. But their ordeal wasn't over. The whaling stations were on the other side of the island, across a range of unmapped, glacier-covered mountains that had never been crossed. Exhausted, and with only a carpenter's adze for an ice axe and screws from the boat pushed through their boots for grip, Shackleton and 2 others began the final desperate trek. For 36 continuous hours, they climbed treacherous glaciers and navigated icy peaks, driven by sheer willpower. Finally, they stumbled into the Stromness whaling station, faces blackened by blubber smoke, their clothes in tatters. The whalers who saw them were speechless, looking at men who seemed to have returned from the dead. But Shackleton couldn't rest. He still had 22 men waiting on Elephant Island. His first 3 attempts to return were blocked by impenetrable sea ice. The Antarctic would not give up its prisoners icily. Finally, on his 4th try, aboard a small Chilean steam tug called the asterisk Yelcho asterisk, he broke through. As the ship neared Elephant Island, Shackleton scanned the shore with his binoculars. He counted the figures huddled on the beach. 1, 2, 3. All 22 were there. They were alive. Not a single man had been lost from the original crew of the asterisk Endurance asterisk. It was an absolute triumph of leadership and the unbreakable human spirit. Sir Ernest Shackleton's expedition failed in its original goal. They never crossed Antarctica. But what he accomplished was far greater. He led his 27 men through 2 years of unimaginable hardship and brought every single one of them home. His story is not one of conquest, but of courage, resilience, and the incredible bond between a leader and his crew. It reminds us that true success isn't always about reaching the destination, but about how we face the journey, especially when it leads us through hell and back. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey with the light. If this story of survival and leadership inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales from history. We'll see you next time.